Okay.
Good evening. Today we're going to do two movies, coincidentally starring Diane Lane. Um, Ladies and Gentlemen, The Fabulous Stains, which I think was shot in 1979 and came out in 1980 or 81, and Rumblefish, which came out in 1984, I believe. And Both films are kind of realistic, I think, depictions of teenage life during that kind of late 70s, early 80s, mid 80s time period, um, and kind of realistic depictions of the Midwest during that time as well. Um, the book that Rumblefish is based on was written by a woman named Essie Hinton, who was from Tulsa, Oklahoma, and she had four of her books made into movies. The first one that was made was called Tex, and we saw that together, you and I. That came out in
Mm-hmm.
1982, and that wasn't directed by Francis Ford Coppola. But the next year, '83, he made The Outsiders, and right on the back of The
Yeah.
Outsiders, using the same cast. He made, and in the same location in Tulsa, he made Rumblefish. Um, After that, another movie was made of one of her books called That Was Then, This Is Now, which I believe was also filmed in Tulsa, but it was by a different director. You and I saw The Outsiders in Austin,
Yep.
at a theater that was just north of where we were living, um,
Mm-hmm.
in a
Mm-hmm.
kind of a strip mall, I believe. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and Yeah, those movies had a big influence on me, especially Outsiders and Rumblefish, and also Essie Hinton's books um, became very popular. She was kind of the progenitor of young adult novels, books
Mm-hmm.
for young people that dealt with real life issues that weren't cheesy like Judy Blume, that were actually pretty realistic. Um, and after she wrote those books, she kind of just settled down and didn't really write anymore. Um, but
Oh, I didn't know that.
she but those books are pretty poignant books for that time, and really dealt realistically with a lot of the social problems of youth during that particular period. You could say that 1965 to 1985, um, and
Mm-hmm.
uh, and she became very popular. At When I was a young adult, or when I was around 9 or 10, 11, a lot of kids were reading her books. And So I'm going to give it over to you, and then I'll make some commentary. You want to start with let's start with Rumblefish, I guess, since I did that intro about it. And then, yeah.
Okay. It takes you immediately into another world because the black and white photography is so striking, and in a way, calling it black and white doesn't quite get it. It's really gray photography. Uh, all these shades of gray, and and how he concentrates on the faces, and these are faces that we came to know through the 80s and 90s and beyond. Uh, Nicolas Cage, uh, Diane Lane, of course, uh, Vincent Spano, Mickey Rourke, who was such a promising actor in his youth and became kind of a freak when he got older. And I don't mean that really disparagingly. He just uh, became this super bodybuilder. I don't know. It's very hard to trace that guy's arc. There, he made this wonderful film. If you remember, The Pope of Greenwich Village.
Yeah.
With
Eric Roberts.
Eric Roberts, right? And they were both terrific. And Geraldine Fitzgerald was terrific, and the supporting actors were terrific. And you thought that this was an actor who could, do anything, and then he really did not. And as you say, S.E. Hinton stopped writing books sort of mysteriously, to my view, but it is I think Coppola gets his effects in this because he makes adolescence a closed world, which is what it feels like, especially in that time. You'd know more about that than I, but adolescence feels like there's nothing else. And I think that's common, in the United States at least, and maybe more common when nobody's shooting at you. But he makes this enclosed world that these young people live in, and the only adult is this almost robotic cop who just hates. And the drunk father, played by Dennis Hopper, who is, to my view, increasingly unforgivable as the film goes on. His sons are loyal to him, Mickey Rourke and Matt Dillon. And you have this uncanny, almost, to me now, that I'm almost 78 years old, this uncanny beauty of Matt Dillon and Mickey Rourke and Diane Lane and Diana Scarlett, who was a very interesting actress, made some very interesting films and performances. And am I missing? Is she in Rumblefish, or is she in The Fabulous Stains? Sometimes
she's in Rumblefish.
She's in Rumblefish.
Yeah.
Okay. Who was always a very interesting presence on the screen. Complicated, probably why she didn't become a bigger star or something. And the sexual tensions and the tensions, the demands upon the young men that they put on each other, that they're going to fight this obviously more middle class gang, and the Matt Dillon character is the leader. He's supposed to be the leader, but he's trying to live up to his big brother, who's Mickey Rourke, who's disappeared, and doesn't even have a name to these people. He's called the Motorcycle Boy. And so you get this very abstracted sense of life, very enclosed sense of life, that has a great deal of power within it in terms of emotional intensity. And yet, one of the things I noticed about the film, and I hadn't seen it since we saw it 40 years ago, was not much actually happens, which is another quality of being especially male and young and working class in the United States, especially at that time. Not much actually happens. They talk, they go from here to there, they try to connect Matt Dillon and the middle class girl Diane Lane, try to connect, they kind of do, they kind of don't. And the conversations are very repetitive, visually fascinating. Visually, everything is happening all at once. But when you look at the actual actions, there's a sense of helplessness and a sense of repetitiveness that they can't get out of this atmosphere, this circle. And then you have, it's building and building. The motorcycle boy comes back, and you have the presence or non-presence, because he's gone to the West Coast from Tulsa to find his mother, their mother. He and Matt Dillon are brothers, of course, and their mother walked out on them. When you see the father, you can understand the person walking out on that. But I don't mean you can sympathize necessarily, but you can understand. And he's gone to see the mother, and that's changed him. It's a mysterious, almost mythic kind of presence, the mother, but it's changed him. He's come back to where he was something very special. They're treating him very special, but he clearly feels this emptiness, this pointlessness that is eating at him from the inside. The outside doesn't matter much to him anymore. It's eating at him from the inside. And Coppola uses that wonderful device where they pass the Matt Dillon and his crew past the pet store, and in the window, I guess, there's a fish tank, and the fish, the rumble fish, quote unquote, are in color. Everything else is in blazing grays, and the fish are in color, which was a neat cinematic trick when it was made. Remember, this is before computers, before you could just do everything on a keyboard. So that took some doing at the time, and then the climaxing scene when he and his brother, Matt Dillon and Mickey Rourke, break into the pet store. And as somebody who's made a documentary and as somebody who's been on the set of several films, I started to think, this is an impossible scene to shoot. Mickey Rourke is letting out all these little animals. He's crashing these cages. He's letting out the birds. How did they possibly contain this scene and shoot it? What happened to all these creatures that are running around? At the end of films now, there's always this little statement that the ASPCA or some animal rights organization has been on the set and there's just no animals were harmed during the shooting of this picture. I don't know if I didn't look. I didn't really at the very end. I don't think that credit appeared, but all these little animals, fish in fish tanks, just the fish tank's broken, away go the fish, and there hasn't been, to my knowledge, a scene like that. The animals aren't actors. The panicky animals are panicky animals, and Mickey Rourke is opening the cages and letting the birds out, letting the dogs out, letting the cats out, and breaking the fish bowls. And why does he need to do that? And you see, he gets to the rumblefish. Now, I'll tell you, I'll insert a personal story in there. When I was 7 years old, we were living in Queens, New York, and I was given a little bit of money. I don't know what it was, $2 or $3 bills maybe, which had a buying power more like 10 times that in 1952 or three, and to go to the pet store by myself. My mother had 3 small children besides me, so there was no question of an adult accompanying me, and buy some fish, pet fish. I guess it had been my idea. I guess I'd wanted it. I guess I looked at the pet store, because it was certainly not my mother's idea. Pet fish weren't her kind of thing. And the owner, the shopkeeper, saw the fish I wanted. He didn't tell me about them at all. And he put the 2 fish in a paper container with water. And I took it home, very proud. We'd gotten a fish bowl. And when I opened the container when I got home, there were nothing but shreds of fish flesh. The fish had destroyed each other. And I don't remember my reaction, but I was a kid who didn't show any reactions. So basically, I would assume that we flushed the fish down the sink of the toilet and nothing more was said. But I never forgot it, obviously. And when Mickey Rourke is saying that these rumble fish, if you don't separate them, they'll kill each other. But he's thinking, if you just let them go free in water, they'd be fine. They'd just separate and go their own ways. And the metaphor, as far as I could see it, was in this film, this young adolescent energy is confined in this society. It's not made use of in this society, especially working class. All the society tells the young basically is grow up and be like your parents, and don't make any trouble. I mean, really, that's the message. And Mickey Rourke is imagining through the fish a life where people would be free to discover themselves, to discover life. And his final act before he does the thing that he's pretty sure he's going to get killed for, he tells his little brother, Matt Dillon, just get on the bike and go follow the river as far as you can. It'll take you to the sea. Now, what Matt Dillon, uneducated, with very little experience, is going to do when he gets there is left to our conjecture, but he does get out. He gets out of that situation. And Mickey Rourke, of course, is gunned down. He's needlessly, uselessly. He's murdered, killed. A murder that nobody's going to pay for. But not before Mickey Rourke lets those fish into the river, and they don't attack each other. They instantly separate and go their own ways. And I'd never seen a scene like that, where you have such a realistic enactment. Because, like I said, the fish, the dogs, and the cats and the birds, they're not actors. They're in those cages and bowls and aquariums and stuff, and they are being monumentally disrupted and panicky. And what that set must have looked like, or that it wasn't necessarily a set. It might have been a store that they contracted to disrupt. But a set in terms of a contained area where the camera work was going on, because it all has to be lit, it all has to be staged, cameras have to be placed. This is what looks like a very spontaneous thing is actually, in the filming of it, not spontaneous at all. And so what that set actually looks like is, I kept being fascinated with, my God, what are you people doing behind the camera right now? Who's running after all these goddamn animals? And he must have shot a lot of footage for that, because it's not something you can do twice. It's not something you can say, okay, cut, let's go back to XYZ line and take it from there again. You can't do that. Once those things start to be disrupted, you've got to follow that through all the way. So in terms of filmmaking, I was fascinated because they did it so very well. But in terms of the metaphor of what's going on, what's he actually doing, Mickey Rourke, at the pet store? He is connecting as best he can, which is violently. He doesn't know anything else, with these elemental forces, fish, birds, elemental. Those species were here before Homo sapiens got here. Homo sapiens are pretty new, about 200,000 years old. Those species are older than that. And it's as I watched it, I haven't seen it since we saw it. As I watched it, I thought, I've never seen a scene like that. I've been going to movies all my life. My mother was taking me to movies when I was, an infant. I've never seen a scene like that. And so Rumblefish and The Outsiders exist in a kind, because they were both filmed in black and white, and they both had that.
Outsiders wasn't in black and white.
It wasn't in black and white?
No.
I remember it in black and white. Huh. Well, Jazz and I watched Rumblefish, and she said we should see The Outsiders, and now we should, because I don't remember that at all.
It's very hard to find the version that we saw in the theater, because there was all this, there was all these lawsuits about different footage and the music in it, and it's I've not been able to find the actual movie that I saw in the theater. Like the one that I see, it has a bunch of extra footage that was shot that makes it kind of cheesy, but yeah, it's a good movie. It's a different movie from it's a very different movie from Rumblefish, in that it's kind of shot like a 1960s teenager movie in a way, and it's
that's interesting.
It's very traditional kind of filmmaking, and it's got an orchestration and a whole, it's got like a Stevie Wonder song as the introduction, but it's a good movie for sure. But yeah, it's very different from Rumblefish is a very, 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 very different movie.
Well, Rumblefish, that makes Rumblefish a unique movie. Yeah. I mean, there isn't another movie like Rumblefish.
Yeah, there was a lot in it. I kept thinking of Eraserhead when I was watching it too.
Yeah.
There's a lot of Eraserhead in the movie, and I think that he also he had the he had the actors watch different movies like The Island of Dr. Moreau and old German uh, movies from the
Huh.
20s and just to get in the mood of the film. Um, and there's a lot of that in the movie too, like German avant-garde films from the 20s and 30s. Um, but
That's interesting. That's very interesting.
yeah, there is a version of there's a DVD with a voiceover by Francis Ford Coppola that you might want to watch. I'm sure he talks about that scene with the animals and everything. But yeah, but I liked. There's a few scenes in it that I like. Bunch of scenes in it that I like a lot. That like one of the scenes is where they're in downtown Tulsa and he's just kind of going along the street and showing all the different street scenes and then going in the clubs and everything. And I feel like he really got that really well, and probably from
Hmm.
being in
Hmm.
the city over during making The Outsiders and everything, he got a real feel for the city and of downtowns in the Midwest in the early '80s, and
Yeah.
the kind of emptiness and there was like a lack of traffic back then. there wasn't so many wasn't so many cars everywhere, and and all the industry had kind of left all those places and not
Yes.
been replaced by anything, and there's a kind of deserted feeling about the whole movie. But that scene and then the actual rumble scene I thought was choreographed really well. I mean, it's not like a realistic fight, but I thought that was done real well,
Hmm.
and the
Hmm.
soundtrack is just amazing. It's Stuart Copeland, the drummer from the Police, did the soundtrack, and
Hmm.
it's very very good. But the one thing you might notice in the movie is the use of clocks. Like there's always these clocks and these ticking noises, and then he keeps having these scenes that are sped up scenes of the sun casting shadows over
Hmm.
fire escapes and things like that. So there's this whole theme of time in the movie and time passing more quickly
Yeah.
than the characters know. Like the characters aren't aware of how fast the time
Right.
is passing
Right.
them because they're like adolescents, and like you said, it is like a bubble, and especially at that time, it was that whole teenager thing had really been condensed and turned into its own world in the 1970s that was totally separate from adults. Like
Hmm.
I really think that the generation gap between Generation X and the baby boomers was even bigger than the generation gap between baby boomers and their parents in a sense, because our it, there was this whole marketing of teenagerhood and just things just absolutely marketed only to teenagers and whole ways of being
That's right.
and but and I think that really came to a big
That's a really good point because marketing to teenagers didn't start. I was born in 1945. Marketing to teenagers didn't start until the really
late
mid
50s.
60s.
I I really I would have said the late 50s.
Well, it yeah.
I mean, it's a gradual thing, but it like with rock and roll, I think that was kind of in the I don't know, like Bobby Soxer type stuff. It was kind of
Well, with
a
with
separate world.
with rock and roll, AM radio, the top 10 was basically what was left over from 1940 swing
Yeah,
until Heartbreak Hotel in early 1956, Elvis Presley.
yeah,
And suddenly, there were 3 or 4 rock and roll songs in the top 10. By 1957, the top 10 was rock and roll. And that music that had been marketed to adults on AM. AM radio turned into the music stations, the pop stations, turned into youth stations. And they did it very reluctantly. I mean, they were forced to do it because that's what was selling. And so by 1958, basically, then you had a full-fledged youth market, but the rest of marketing didn't really catch up in my memory. This is not academic here.
Yeah.
Until the early 60s. So that because I know, like my good friend Steve Erickson, the novelist, writer, he's 5 years younger than me. And he has a completely different memory of how the music grew for him. He was only 6 when Elvis Presley hit. I was 11 when Elvis Presley hit. Actually, I was 10. I would turn 11 that year. And just suddenly, even for 10-year-olds, everything changed. Rock Around the Clock was like 2 years before that, and my cousin Tony and I waited for it to come on the radio. But there was a whole lot of basically 1940s kind of music, between one playing a Rock Around the Clock and the next playing a Rock Around the Clock. But the full-fledged marketing to youth, that was early 60s. Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the phenomena of youth that I think occurred in the 1970s was turning youth into little adults, and I think that both of these movies really get into that and kind of present that, where and the Mickey Rourke character says he stopped being a little kid when he was 5, and it's and they're really being forced to deal, even if you're coming from a middle class kind of sheltered zone in that time, you're still being forced to deal with all this adult stuff. Like, you're constantly being confronted with sex, like all the time, on billboards and magazines and everything, and that sexual revolution is going on with kids and with teenagers, all of a sudden, like, teenage sex is like this kind of accepted thing, and we're expected to have an adult to take it on. You're just like a little adult all of a sudden, and it was definitely something I saw, but and it's interesting. It kind of it stunts you in a way to grow up so fast. It's a strange thing, and I've seen that a lot. But what was I gonna say? And I think that's also a theme in the Fabulous Stains too, where this girl's mother dies and she doesn't have a father there, and then she's all of a sudden she has to get a job, and she has her own place, and she can't pay her bills, and she doesn't know what to do, and nobody's really looking after her, and it's kind of this stark thing where and she's in a city that's been totally deindustrialized. And one of the interesting things about the Fabulous Stains is that it was filmed in 2 locations. I think the kind of tour part of the movie was filmed in British Columbia, but the actual town that she's from location was in a place called Johnstown, Pennsylvania, and in a totally deindustrialized place after the 70s, and a place that in one of the first scenes you see a flood control, like a county flood control truck going up the street behind her, and this is a place that was just constantly flooded for some reason, this town, and and there's these really stark scenes of her like up in the mountains with the whole steel mill behind her, and and
Mm-hmm.
it's a very stark town. And they used it for a couple of different movies. They used it for another movie, another really good movie that kind of fits into this era in a way, like a realistic teenager movie called All the Right Moves with Tom
Mm-hmm.
Cruise in it. But yeah, they used this town in a few different movies. But what did you think of Fabulous Stains?
I was really, really glad to see it. Uh, the Diane Lane does a fantastic job. It's one of her best performances, and it's one of her earliest. I mean, uh, because the character has a lot of range. She, on the one hand, she's frightened. On the other hand, she discovers that she's ambitious. I mean, she steals the guy's song, and there's not much he can do about it. Uh, on the one hand, she's scared. On the other hand, she's tough. Uh, she goes from not having much talent to understanding what it takes to do what she's doing. She has a what actors call an arc. She has a very wide arc, uh, and she was, as an actress, and she was very young, but she was completely up to it. Uh, at first, she's an awkward performer. By the end of it, she's an accomplished performer. Uh, she carries the movie on its back. I mean, other people are good in it too, but if she's not good, there's no movie. And that was how old could she have been? 17.
Oh God, yeah, probably 17, maybe younger, maybe 16.
Yeah, I mean, and she kind of immersed herself in that role. And the thing is, and this is something that gets me about such young actors, no actor that young, has an objectivity between themselves and the role that you learn in acting as you get older. God knows what was going through the heads of those young people doing those roles in both films. Uh, and and uh, and ladies and gentlemen, The Fabulous Stains was very sharply written. And I went, "Who's writing this?" And I look it up, and the film credit goes to a Rob Morton.
Right.
But Rob Morton was
Yeah.
an alias for a woman named Nancy Dowd.
Right.
And then Nancy, who was born in '45 like me, and has probably had a very interesting, erratic life, because she writes under these male names, but sometimes she doesn't. There are two names, two films that she wrote in the '70s: Swing Shift and Slapshot.
What?
That are both terrific films.
Really? I didn't know that. She wrote Slapshot?
Yeah.
Wow.
She wrote Slapshot.
Holy shit.
And Slapshot, is a wonderful film.
Yeah.
And, neither you nor I are sports people.
Right.
and it's a film about a hockey team, but it's a terrific film. Paul Newman and everybody else in it is good. She wrote Slapshot. And she was young. I mean, she's in the '70s when she's writing this. She's about 30 years old, and she wrote Slapshot. She wrote Swing Shift, and Swing Shift. God, she had to be still in her 20s when she wrote Swing Shift. I remember seeing that with Dixie and George in Amarillo, Texas, and Dixie, when George joined the Navy, Dixie had followed and gone to San Diego, where he was stationed in training, and worked in the factories. and so she knew that life, uh, and she said, yeah, they did it really well. So Nancy Dowd really made a contribution in the 70s. And she wrote things later under various names. Nothing as potent as Swing Shifts and Slapshot and the Fabulous Stains. But and Christine Lottie was in Swing Shifts, and Christine Lottie is the mother, or the aunt rather, in the Fabulous Stains. And when she's in that TV interview,
yeah, I know,
and she says these young people are resisting, and the interviewer says, resist what? And she says, life as we know it. And then she has that line about the female existence should not lead just only to the grave or to the supermarket. It was a really well-written thing, because this woman is a working class woman who's just trying to do the best she can under enormous odds. And the writer, Nancy Dowd, doesn't give her an awareness she would not have, but resist what? And she comes out with very forcefully, life as we know it. And that we is a very particular we, is we women, working class women, middle class women, as we know it. These are the alternatives you're giving us, and they suck. And so she was able to say that she was very proud and of the Diane Lane character for going out and doing this and getting this said. That's a great moment.
Yeah, that
is a moment I think would have meant a great deal to many people, many young people in the audience.
Yeah, that monologue is killer, and Christine Lottie really does a great job with that. Yeah, there's some really really great performances and scenes in the movie, and then there's some really really bad ones. You know.
Yes, exactly.
There's some really like chintzy parts of the movie, and then there's some really good parts. I mean, you couldn't expect the British band guys to be good actors. They were all real guys from real bands, like the bass player is the bass player from the Clash, and then the guitarist and drummer from the Sex Pistols, and then the lead singer is Ray Winstone, who's just been an actor in Britain for a long time. But I liked the whole cultural part of the movie too, where that band that's fronted by Fee Waybill, who was the lead singer of the Tubes, kind of like old 70s kind of hippie band guy, like the old rock and roll guy,
right,
contrasted with these new guys, and that whole thing. And I thought that it did that really well to show how the way I felt when I was a kid, like the AM radio and the pop music, and just hearing like Rhinestone Cowboy over and over and over again on AM radio, and just, Don't You Make My Brown Eyes Blue and crap like that,
yes.
Just over like literally like every 10 minutes, on the radio. And I just and I always felt like I was drowning in polyester, and then and then when they start, I remember hearing Whip It by Devo for the first time, and it was just like something totally different and new, and just, it wasn't explicitly saying fuck you to all that, but it really did, like it really just like severed something really sharply. Yes. and that whole punk rock thing really did, and it just felt like you were kind of like breaking out of this like corporate created bubble that music producers had created, and it's the thing is that whole punk rock thing was so nihilistic, and didn't there was just something very unpositive about punk rock.
Right.
There was other elements like the hardcore music that was more positive and more healthy and strong, but that whole thing, like I always felt like it kind of funneled a group of people or a generation of people that would have been active. I don't want to say politically, but just like that would have been activists and would have been a positive force that kind of like funneled them into a kind of nihilistic drug thing, and it's like that was ultimately destructive. But
Hmm.
but that whole performance by Fee Waybill, and just his whole band and the whole thing the whole thing that occurs with his band is a pretty funny element of the movie.
Yes.
But
Yes.
yeah, there's some really strong scenes where that are and there's some really funny scenes in it too, like the first show they have in that small club, and she just ends up
Hmm.
getting pissed off at the whole audience, and says this place is a shithole and we don't put out, and it just goes off on the audience. I just thought that was so funny, I got a big laugh out of that. But yeah, Diane Lane is does show a lot of range in this, and is put in a lot of awkward situations in the movie that she plays off very well, and does a
Yeah.
really good job with. And Laura Dern and the other girl aren't displayed as much as she is, but they also do a really good job in those roles.
Yeah.
I thought.
And I like it surprised me. I didn't expect it. The music video footage at the end, where you have Diane Lane and Laura Dern and the other woman uh, in various costumes, and you cut with the Andrews sisters, and you cut with various black and white footage, but it so they've been uh, in a sense co-opted, but also in a sense, successful on their terms, and at the same time, which is what success usually means in the music business. And that music video just kind of laid it all out in images. I didn't expect it, and it I hadn't remembered it, but it was very well done.
Well, the ending is why what's her name, Dowd. I can't remember her first name, but the ending
Yeah,
is
Nancy Dow.
the ending is why she didn't put her name on the movie. There was a big disagreement about the ending.
Huh? Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, and she took her name off the movie, and so they just like replaced it with the producers made up a name. There was a big disagreement between Lou Adler and I think it was two women that worked on the script.
Huh?
And I guess they didn't want that ending. I'm not sure what kind of ending they did want, but yeah, there was a.
I can see that. The ending surprised me because it wasn't in the vein of the movie, really. But at the same time, I liked it. And and clearly, she was a hardhead. I don't know if she's still alive, but I mean, I can relate to that, taking your name off a movie. I set my career on fire more than once. And clearly, she set her career on fire when she did that. But that's interesting. I'm glad you dug that up.
Yeah, it's interesting the whole thing too about the they're rebelling and they're doing something kind of rebellious, but at the same time they're like being sexy in a way, and
Right.
which is an interesting thing. There was a band called the Runaways with Joan
Mm-hmm.
or Joan Jett started out in, and they would do that same
Yep.
thing, like wear lingerie on stage, and they were all like 16 years old, and they kind of did that same thing, which I'm not really sure what that means, but it. I thought it was really interesting how they got that whole thing about we're rebels and we're doing something rebellious and telling everybody to fuck off, but then like the whole crowd of girls starts dressing just like them and like conforming to
Right.
their look, and it's no longer like a rebellious thing. And then the British lead singer guy kind of pulls the covers on that, and they all kind of realize what they're doing. But that whole thing, I've never seen that really addressed in a movie before, or in popular culture before.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I think it's something that
Oh,
everybody kind of anybody who's involved in any kind of subculture, like they go through a time of thinking about that. Like how can I be a rebel if I'm dressing the same way as a bunch of other people? But,
yes. Well,
yeah.
well, I mean, me and a couple of neighbor friends saw Elvis Presley on the Tommy and Jimmy Dorsey variety show, 1956, and we're 11 years old, 12 years old, and the next day we're combing our hair like him to be rebels.
Yeah.
So we get a look that says we're rebels, and that we're conforming to each other. But that's actually just very natural. People learn in a way when you're young people, children learn by acting. They see things and they imitate them. I think it's one of the reasons, and this opens a big other subject, why really acting to me is the most mysterious of the arts. Partly because we've been doing it since we were infants. We hear sounds, we imitate them. That's how we learn to speak. So that whole thing of assuming identities, imitating this, imitating that, is basic to our natures. So I don't know. Are you conforming, or are you, assimilating something? That's a way to the word they're using now is appropriate, but so that opens a whole other avenue, because
I mean,
to identify and to imitate is one way we learn. It's not just conforming. It's something more complicated.
yeah, it's interesting too, because if you go back before the 20th century, it's a so like you're saying, it's natural to emulate, especially at that age. Um, and so before the 20th century, what are these pubescent males and female? What are they emulating? They're mostly emulating people in their community, or you go way before that and they're emulating like maybe a mythological figure or something, or a warrior or something like that. But then you get into the 20th century, and especially that this time period, the 60s and 70s and 80s, and all of a sudden there's an actual culture industry that's dictating
Yes.
those archetypes, which is a lot of
Yes.
power to have over a group of people, right? Like
Yes.
that's that's a whole other thing that I think is addressed in the movie. It when I watched it again, it really, a lot of the movie came off just kind of chintzy in a way, and kind of like almost like one of those TV movies, like Diary of
Mm-hmm.
a Teenage Alcoholic, But it
Right.
and then but there was something. There's another half of the movie that's just kind of really powerful that runs through the whole movie too. And yeah, it would be an interesting movie to be on the set of for sure. Um, if only just to be, with all those different personalities being thrown
Right.
together is a very interesting thing. I mean, it was shot in '79, and then because of that conflict over the ending, it didn't come out until I think '81. Um, and
Mm-hmm.
so those guys from the Sex Pistols had just been through like this giant horrible thing with
Right.
their band falling apart and Sid Vicious dying, and I think the Clash was also breaking up at that time too. So it's interesting to have all those guys in the same movie. But it must have been a very interesting set to be on, and those bleak locations too. Um,
Yes.
but yeah, I think I saw this movie. I think they played it on like Channel 5 when I was like 9 or 10 for some reason, and it just blew me away. I was like, I've never seen any movie kind of, because it really made me feel like the first time that I listened to like the first Sex Pistols record or something. Like I really got that feeling from the movie and from Diane
Mm-hmm.
Lane's
Yeah.
character, and it really got that kind of initial, what they call punk rock kind of feeling. They did that very well in the film, and and I also thought they got the working class thing down really well, and just that kind of
Yeah. I
malaise.
thought so too.
That, like those scenes with Christine Lottie and that other woman where they're just sitting
Yeah.
in the dining room and talking and doing their nails, and I mean they got that really really well, and
Yeah.
that would be a totally different scene now, and with
True.
like everybody'd be looking at their phones, and there would be and I think there would be much more of an influence of pop culture in that milieu, and also a much more of an influence of drugs in that milieu, whether it was periphery or not. But like they're drinking, you see the two women drinking a lot,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but there isn't that whole like people being strung out on different drugs yet in that world. They're still kind of holding it together. There's still kind of a community that's there, um, however threadbare it is. But yeah, interesting movie. Well, you want to wrap it up there?
Yeah, that's a good place for it.
Okay.
Yeah.